Princess Lyra's ears twitched as she strode down the polished corridors of the Auralan royal palace, each step measured and precise, though the faint hum of the gravlifts beneath her feet made her feel almost weightless. She had practiced the art of regal composure for countless cycles, yet today her patience was being tested by something, or rather someone, utterly unpredictable. The summit was underway, and representatives from dozens of star systems milled about, their translucent skins and chittering vocal tones filling the air with a symphony of alien etiquette. Lyra's long ears, which twitched with every passing emotion, quivered slightly at the thought that humans were somehow invited to this assembly, their species historically dismissed as amusingly primitive. Jace entered the hall with a lopsided grin, hands shoved casually into the pockets of a jacket that appeared to have survived 3 minor wormhole incidents unscathed. His hair had that perfect kind of chaos that no Auralan stylist could imitate, and Lyra couldn't help but notice how he tripped over a grav-floating carpet with what seemed like deliberate disregard for the laws of physics. He recovered mid-fall with a flourish, sending his energy drink into a slow, floating arc that hovered in mid-air, much to the horror of a passing security drone. Lyra's ears twitched sharply. This human was supposed to be a diplomat, yet he treated the palace as though it were a playground. Then, without warning, the security drone malfunctioned, spinning wildly like a top possessed by a particularly vengeful AI. Jay stepped forward, wagging a finger at it as if scolding a misbehaving pet, and with a series of improbable gestures, the drone stabilized and resumed its programmed patrol. Lyra blinked, her ears flicking back. Not only had he survived a potential hazard that could have vaporized a squadron of Auralan guards, he'd done it with a casual smile, murmuring something about bad wiring and worse coffee. The diplomat's charm, or chaos, didn't stop there. When 2 factions began bickering over the seating arrangements, Jace launched into an impromptu speech that somehow soothed tensions, peppering it with jokes about asteroid buffet etiquette and zero-gravity dance-offs. Lyra suppressed a giggle, though she would never admit it aloud. Her long ears quivered in disbelief as the normally stuffy assembly erupted in laughter. Even the Emperor's advisors, who prided themselves on their stoic control, were caught off guard, chuckling behind their hovering consoles. As the summit continued, Jace moved from one technological disaster to another, mending a quantum communication panel with a paperclip and a quip about human ingenuity being frighteningly cheap. Lyra followed him, half in dread, half in fascination. Each time he defied expectation, the impossible became ordinary, and the ordinary became laughably irrelevant. She found herself whispering under her breath, her ears drooping in a mixture of awe and anxiety. "Father, this man isn't normal." Even in the midst of galactic diplomacy, humor threaded through Jace's every move, turning a tense, formal summit into a stage for absurd brilliance. Lyra realized with a strange thrill that no one, not the Emperor, not the alien delegates, not even the palace AI, had ever encountered anyone like him. And yet, in that chaotic, slightly ridiculous brilliance, there was a hint of something far more dangerous and extraordinary than she could have imagined. Her ears twitched in silent recognition. This human might just change everything. Alarms blared through the Auralan royal palace, a chaotic symphony of red lights and pulsing energy fields. Princess Lyra's ears twitched involuntarily, her instincts screaming at her to dive for cover. But she found herself frozen as Jace strolled into the command hall, hands in pockets, whistling a tune that sounded suspiciously like a human pop hit. "Well, this looks dramatic," he said, glancing around at the panicked staff and hovering security drones, one of which had already collided with a wall in a frenzy. "Anyone know if there's a cosmic janitor on duty?" Before anyone could respond, a squad of rogue mechs burst through the main doors, plasma rifles spitting blue arcs that made even the most seasoned Auralan soldiers flinch. Lyra's long ears flattened against her head as she watched Jace sidestep the first volley with a movement so fluid it looked choreographed. Then, inexplicably, he hurled a holographic pie at one of the mechs. The pie expanded midair into a fully rendered illusion of a dessert buffet, distracting the machines just long enough for him to sprint past, tossing a wink over his shoulder. Lyra's ears twitched sharply. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. As the rogue mechs recalibrated, Jace began barking orders, not to anyone in particular, just to the room itself. "Right, energy shields, more polygonal, less circular. Yes, that'll confuse them." To her horror, Lyra realized the shields obeyed him, shifting angles and intensities as though anticipating his whims. She had trained for decades in tactical simulations, yet this human's improvisation made her entire strategy seem quaint. A group of minor delegates panicked, hurling alien pastries at the advancing mechs in desperation. Jace dodged a flying custard tart and muttered, "Honestly, can someone at least throw a croissant?" Lyra, for the first time, allowed herself a nervous laugh, her ears twitching in amusement despite the danger. The absurdity of the moment clashed with the sharp reality of the threat, but Jace moved through it with the same ease as if he were walking through a sunny park back on Earth. Then came the negotiations with the rogue faction. Jace leaned on the nearest console, casually rotating a plasma energy model of the palace with one hand while holding an unidentifiable floating snack in the other. He launched into a string of jokes about asteroid traffic jams and interstellar bureaucracy, and to Lyra's astonishment, the enemy commander's mask twitched as if trying to contain a laugh. By the time the last joke landed, the rogue mechs had halted their advance, confused and oddly charmed by the human who seemed immune to fear. Lyra's ears twitched with incredulity. She had been raised to believe humans were inconsequential, yet here one was, turning war into a bizarrely elegant comedy. As the dust settled, Jace straightened, brushing invisible crumbs from his sleeve. "Well, that was fun. Can we get some tea now, or is intergalactic diplomacy strictly pie-flavored?" Lyra's ears drooped, half in exasperation, half in reluctant admiration. She realized with a twinge of dread that she was beginning to rely on his chaotic brilliance, that she might need him to save her empire. The thought made her ears quiver, a silent acknowledgement of a strange, growing respect and an equally strange fear that she had never encountered a human quite like this one before. By the time the palace had regained a semblance of order, Lyra's gaze followed Jace as he meandered through the command hall, tinkering with floating holograms and offering sarcastic commentary to startled staff. Every move he made, every quip and improbable maneuver chipped away at her preconceptions about humanity. She trembled slightly, ears quivering, realizing that this human, so seemingly reckless, was beginning to feel like the only person who could prevent the galaxy from erupting into chaos. And somehow she had to keep up. The alert lights pulsed like a heartbeat throughout the Oralan royal palace, a warning that the invasion fleet had arrived in orbit above the planet. Princess Lyra's ears twitched anxiously, brushing against the edge of the command console, but she didn't move away. She had watched Jace work miracles during the summit and the rogue mech incident, and a part of her refused to believe he could do it again. Yet when he stepped into the command hall with the same casual grin and a floating cup of what looked suspiciously like human coffee, she felt a strange flicker of hope. "Morning, Princess. Lovely day for a little galactic chaos, wouldn't you say?" Jace said, leaning lazily on the holographic star map, which showed dozens of enemy ships advancing in perfect formation. Lyra's ears twitched in irritation at his nonchalance, but she couldn't stop the small smile from tugging at her lips. Somehow, despite the imminent threat, his levity was infectious. The enemy fleet opened fire, sending waves of plasma bursts toward the palace's orbital shields. Jace waved a hand, as if swatting invisible flies, and the shields responded, shifting dynamically, bending the energy beams harmlessly around the planet. Lyra had been trained for decades in defensive tactics, but his improvisation made her best simulations look like child's play. He barked orders to the palace AI with a mixture of sarcasm and charm. "Less triangulation, more dramatic flair. Give me a shield that looks like a dragon breathing fire. I promise it scares them more." The AI complied, adapting instantly. Jace then turned to Lyra, who had been hesitating at the edge of the room. "Your turn," he said, grinning. "Try dodging a plasma grenade, treat it like a floating durian. Trust me, it works." Lyra rolled her eyes, ears flicking, but followed his lead, diving, twisting, and laughing despite herself when the grenade harmlessly fizzled into harmless sparks. For the first time, she felt a thrill in the chaos rather than fear. She realized she had learned something invaluable. Courage wasn't just about following protocol. It was about improvisation, trust, and a willingness to embrace the unpredictable. Jace then orchestrated a counterattack with a series of audacious maneuvers. He hacked the enemy ships, targeting systems, turned their own drones against them, and even sent a holographic decoy of himself taunting their commanders with witty insults. Lyra watched, ears quivering with astonishment, as the enemy fleet faltered under his unconventional brilliance. What had seemed impossible mere hours ago, The survival of her empire now felt like a tangible victory. As the final enemy ship disengaged, drifting helplessly into the void, Lyra exhaled deeply. Her long ears drooped, but not in fear. They reflected relief, pride, and a strange affection for the human who had turned her world upside down. Jay sipped his floating coffee, grinning at her. Well, that was fun. Next time maybe tea, or do we skip straight to cosmic donuts? Lyra laughed aloud, a sound that made her ears quiver with genuine joy. She realized that she had changed. No longer was she the timid princess constrained by rigid expectations. She had grown into a leader who could adapt, improvise, and even find humor in the gravest of crises. And Jace, chaotic, brilliant, impossible, had taught her that courage and ingenuity could come from the most unexpected places. As the palace lights dimmed and the surviving delegates began to applaud, Lyra stepped beside him. Her ears brushed his shoulder in a gesture that was almost human, almost alien, and entirely her own. The galaxy had been saved, but more importantly, she had discovered a new way to face the impossible, with humor, intelligence, and a hint of audacious absurdity. And as she looked at Jace, grinning with effortless charm, she knew this was only the beginning of a story that would change her people forever. Her ears twitched once more, this time in a soft, victorious rhythm, and she whispered, "Father, this man really isn't normal." And somehow, that was exactly what made him perfect.